Okay, welcome back. Now for a video on the proper attitude. Woo! Proper attitude to have in the unitive state, or at least what her attitude was. I turned the microphone up. The sound was pretty bad on the last one, so we're trying to improve the sound quality here. One thing that was crucial for her getting to the unitive state was when she figured out that love is in the will and not in the emotions. There is a link, of course, between will and emotions. In fact, the will stands in a unique position as the mediator between mind and emotions. Yet the emotions belong always and forever to the self, while the will has the capacity of belonging equally to God and the self, as a kind of shared faculty. The union of wills abandons the self's feelings of its own love in order to enter into God's own love, love beyond all emotionality. One attitude to have in this, if you find yourself in the unitive state, is to remain passive, to grace and embrace silence. The key to the present movement is to remain passive to interior silence and to trust it as we trust God Himself, and to let nothing take us from it. While this center acts as a magnet, drawing everything into itself, in order to be wholly drawn in, we must first abandon all that is contrary to silence, all the disturbing movements of mind and emotion. We must remain passive to the center, which frees us from slavery. When we come to the point where these movements no longer disturb the inner peace or draw us from its silence, these movements grow weak, fade, and eventually come to nothing. They no longer have power over us. Thus, the center gradually frees us from the tyranny of the lower faculties, once we are no longer slaves to mind or emotion. We have come upon the essence of human freedom. By remaining passive to the center, it has become everything to us, not only the center of being, but the center of all interior movements that now have reference to the center and are subject to it. You can see why she calls herself a Stoic, if you know anything about Stoicism and apatheia. It's pretty intense. She was, you have to have 100% in the will. All or none means that we are either one with God all the time or not one with Him at all. It means that the soul lives with the fullest degree of intensity, wherein there is no grading of interior strength or unity. We cannot be more unified or less unified. Rather, this oneness with God is all or none, and to live life at the fullest possible degree of intensity is another characteristic of the unitive life. Another characteristic is what's called exercising the gifts. Those who live in fear and trepidation of falling, sinning, losing ground, who spend their lives making sure they do not, have little trust in God and do not exercise the gifts of the unitive state. And because they never experience the continual saving grace of this state, would have no understanding of what it means to be confirmed in grace. But then, failure to take risks is not indicative of the unitive life. In fact, it's just the opposite. The very nature and purpose of the unitive state is to bring about this final demise of the self. It is all a preparation for a more final transformation. But unless we are confirmed in grace, that is, in the egoless state, unless we realize by experience that God will never let us go, we cannot let go of the self. It is as if God had to prove to us again and again that when all is gone, He still remains. The way forward then is to exercise the great gifts of the unitive life, to take all the risks, stretch the human potential, and allow God to save us every day, every moment of our lives. And the reason why the soul in the unitive state is so motivated is because it wants to repay God love for love, but in a just way, which of course is impossible. But this is not the only reason the soul desires to suffer. The burning desire of this phase and of the fountainhead of charity is to love God as equally as God loves the soul, to give as it has received, to return measure for measure. For the lover cannot be satisfied if he fails to feel that he loves as much as he is loved. Nor would he be satisfied in heaven if he did not feel he loved God as much as he loves him. Thus, to return love, the soul would go through every test, forfeit every experience, prove its love by suffering, and spend the rest of its life giving without receiving a thing in return. To such lengths is the soul carried away in its desire to return love for love. And in this, the soul should remember that it should take no credit, that it is actually God, loving God in oneself. To understand this type of equality, we have to see that for God to love us is the same as for God to love Himself, and that the love the soul bears for God is God's own love. Thus, it is not I who love God, rather it is God loving Himself. In other words, what God loves in me is Himself, and that in me which loves God is also Himself. To completely realize the truth of this insight comes very close to doing away with the self altogether. For if I do not love God, then what good am I? How am I needed or necessary? The day we see the full implication of what this means, we are getting close to the final demise of the self. With this demise, there is no union remaining, and therefore no further need for equality of love. Thus, one way out of the problem of equality of love is to have no equality at all. God, loving Himself, is the only equality there is. And almost finished here. She's looking for a new level of existence. How? Through all these trials, which is the way, the path, the cross of the unitive life. So far we have gone over two ways in which the soul can suffer in this stage. It suffers because it cannot share the inner flame or find its adequate outward expression. And it suffers from a lack of personal self-gratification, which is a deep loneliness that only the eternal vision can fill. Other hardships can be endured. To be endured are trials and tribulations common to every man. And if mine were any different, it was due to their sheer number and variety. A compendium of these trials might look like a modern-day list of St. Paul's casualties: robbed 3 times, car wrecked once, fired many times, and so on. Though I was never stoned, I would substitute for this the fact that I was once egged, yes, indeed egged by my beloved students. But the ignominy of these trials is that I could not claim that they were endured for any great cause. Though I may have lived my life as intensely with God as did St. Paul, there was no satisfaction in the knowledge that my sufferings counted for a thing. In fact, I saw them as a waste because they accomplished nothing, were getting me nowhere, and certainly were no good to anyone else. If there was any immediate value in these trials, it was that they eventually became commonplace and therefore unchallenging, which kept me on the lookout for variety and change. When one is used to clearing 20-foot hurdles every day, it becomes routine, and there enters the search for some new level of existence that can be tapped into or tested. And so she has tremendous